just in case
Okay.
some of our listeners were going to start at 10:30. So.
Okay. I'm on board.
This is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM. We have with us on WZRD via Zoom, Lisa Torem, Northeastern Illinois University alumna and very prolific rock journalist and fiction writer. Welcome, Lisa. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
Very, very well. We're very glad to have you here. We have been playing a lot of your tracks and reading from excerpts from some books that you wrote to give the listeners some background of all that you do. So you mentioned earlier that there were some tracks that were especially your favorites, and could you explain why that track is your favorite? That one of the tracks that you actually composed, because you are a composer and musician as well.
Thank you for saying that. Things That We've Been Through was a fun piece which I wrote based on Latin rhythms, and I really enjoyed having saxophone in that song. It's kind of like a real easygoing, easy listening tune, and it was a very simple theme, just kind of a love song about missing somebody, and so I liked it. I think it's kind of applicable to many situations.
So you wrote the song as well as performed it, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you like the Latin rhythms. So how did you come to enjoy Latin rhythms?
Great question. So my father was in a swing trio when I was growing up, and they would do very traditional standards. So I was familiar with a lot of those great songs. And also at Northeastern, I was in the jazz ensemble, and we read charts, and a lot of them were things by Duke Ellington, things by, all sorts of jazz composers and arrangers. So that familiarized me with a lot of the different Latin beats.
So the Latin beats were more attractive to you than other beats? What else were you interested in?
Well, I mean, that kind of a samba rhythm. I later interviewed a woman named Lonnie Hall. She was with a group called Brazil 66, who, by the way, grew up in Albany Park. And she's married and worked with Herb Alpert, the famous trumpet player. So I also got into that kind of music because she sang in Portuguese, and there were a lot of wonderful arrangements that she did. So I went through a whole period where I was kind of submerging myself in Latin material.
Fine. Yeah, continue. Don't worry.
Right. And so, I just always loved those rhythms. And the way I approach music is I'll just kind of get into one area and just really submerge myself in that area and ask myself questions and try to find answers to those questions. So, I found those rhythms particularly fun and enjoyable to work with.
What kind of questions did you ask yourself when you were immersing yourself in music?
Well, I play piano, so I would try to imitate some of those rhythms if I could, and or maybe ask another musician, well, how did you get to that ostinato, like that bass run, and what are some other kind of ostinatos that would sound good in that kind of song? A lot of it is imitation. You listen to a recording that you like and you try to imitate it, or you go hear a live band and one of my favorite tunes is a song called Night in Tunisia. Every time I go to a piano bar or anywhere where I hear a jazz trio, I ask for A Night in Tunisia. It's my absolute favorite song. I just love the bass line on that song and the chords and so forth. So I guess everything's based around that song and a few others.
Oh, actually, I think we have a Night in Tunisia, a new version of it from Josie Falbo. Do you know Josie Falbo? She's a Chicago artist as well, a jazz singer, and she has a new CD that recently came out. You Must Believe in Spring, and then I'm pretty sure that A Night in Tunisia is in there.
I will have to check it out.
We'll play it later after this interview.
Okay.
So whose version of Night in Tunisia did you enjoy the most?
Oh, wow, there's been so many. I think Ahmad Jamal. I mean, I think many groups did that song. I just can't put my finger on it right now, but I mean, it's one of those tunes when just about every time I've gone into a little jazz bar, the musicians know it. I was right at a like fest the other day, and there was a trio and they picked right up on it. It's just a fun song because everybody gets a chance to improvise. It's very catchy. You got to love it.
Mhm. Okay, now back to your career. What was your first step in your successful career as a rock journalist and fiction writer after graduating from Northeastern Illinois University? Or did your career begin while you were an NEIU student?
I was always trying to combine music and writing. When I started teaching, well, my degree, I learned about curriculum development and education and things like that with also with music. I studied classical and jazz piano and voice and music history. Then in my graduate program, I learned sociolinguistics, where you kind of learn to take apart language. And that was super helpful in writing lyrics later and putting together interviews, how different people respond to different types of speech and so forth. And I also wrote for like newsletters. So that got my feet wet in terms of writing and just, writing with deadlines. Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot from that experience. And I was just always looking for opportunities. Does someone need somebody to edit a newsletter? Does someone need somebody to do a color story? Does somebody need someone to interview a student or a teacher or a musician? So I was just always looking for those opportunities, and I got many of them.
So you were actively seeking them, or did you ask your contacts to let you know if they knew of any opportunities?
Yeah, but I think I was just sort of like, I had my antenna out wherever I went. There were always cultural activities. So sometimes I would go up to an artist and introduce myself and maybe, arrange for some mini interview at that point, or maybe just write a little review for some kind of Northeastern newsletter, things like that.
Mhm. So even back then, you were already interviewing artists for Northeastern, for let's say some for the newspaper or some other media.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, I ended up doing, in the linguistics department, I ended up doing sort of stories about lessons. And then I did a research project. I was teaching Vietnamese students, and my research project was trying to teach them certain types of English pronunciation through music, because I thought that would be a fun way. So I did this research project, and I incorporated some original music and some standards, and I wanted to give the students an opportunity to listen to English phrases and see if they had pronunciation questions and so forth. So anyway, that turned into a research project that got published in a journal, and then I did some what I call jazz chants, where I would talk to students, have them tell me experiences, and we turned that into sort of like little mini musicals, things like that, just to keep things light and fun.
So did the music actually help the students learn pronunciation, English pronunciation?
I believe so. And they taught me some Spanish. That's how I learned my Spanish, was listening to a lot of traditional, beautiful Mexican music.
Mm-hmm. What about your earlier comment that it helps by studying linguistics, it helps you understand how people respond to speech. So did you apply that to your interviews and how you speak to a person to get them to give you a better answer?
I believe so, because in sociolinguistics, you're not studying foreign language. You're studying dialect, accent, like how people regionally, and like what's the deeper meaning when somebody it's not like a server in a restaurant, when how they respond to a customer, what a customer says to a server, people playing games, like formal speech, informal speech, how you address someone that you don't know, a lot of things like that, which I hadn't really thought about prior to taking that class. So yeah, that definitely, because as an interviewer, I've spoken to people from all different cultures, people that speak more quickly, more slowly, different, some that are very formal, some that are casual. I need to kind of catch that early on in the conversation, maybe mirror what they're doing to make them more comfortable. I need to be prepared for whatever might happen. So I think that's given me a grounding.
Mhm. And did you, is there any example that you could give us about someone that you might have interviewed that might have spoken slowly, and then you adapted to that person's pace?
Yeah, I don't have an actual name, but I remember interviewing somebody whose pace of speaking was slower than I had anticipated. So what happened was I interrupted the person because I thought the person was done, but the person wasn't done. It's just that he had a slower rate of speaking than I was used to. And what I started to do after that point was to try to get access to a subject's speech, maybe through YouTube or prior interviews, to see what to expect, because you certainly don't want to be in there barging into the interview sentence, in the middle of that sentence. So you want to be comfortable the minute you're on the phone with that person or in person.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that helped you a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Was there so that was what about someone that spoke really fast? Could you give us an example of that in which you adapted to someone speaking fast?
Yeah, well, you try to have as much research under your belt as possible, which I didn't realize in the beginning. But you want to know as much as you can about the person, what producers they're working with, their latest album, their latest concert, and the people that they work with. And that way, you usually can catch that during the interview, so you don't have to keep asking them questions, because that's the last thing you want to do, because that's your job, is to do your homework. So I feel like when I go to an interview and I kind of know the players, I know who their band members are, I know what's going on in the studio for the most part, then I will catch that, and if there's a few words that kind of get drowned out, I can deal with that. I can work around it.
So
or I can follow up.
When you're interviewing someone, you usually assume that the audience is a fan of the person.
Mm-hmm.
Do you also focus a bit on people introducing to people to that artist, people who maybe have not been that much of a fan of the artist? Maybe they listen to other music. What about for just to introduce that artist to new listeners? Has that ever been also on your radar as you interview a famous artist?
Absolutely. It's always exciting when you can get crossover audiences. And I think that's happened to all of us. I remember being a younger person and saying, oh, I don't like classical music, or I don't like country. Well, I changed as I grew and developed and listened to more songs. I mean, you can't just say, I hear people say, I don't like jazz, I don't understand jazz. Well, it's because they probably didn't put the time into hearing some great stuff. And that's how I feel about most music. So it's exciting when people are just getting introduced to an artist. And that gives us an opportunity to talk to that artist about, what's a good grounding song to get that audience involved. Yeah, so I love that.
Mm-hmm. So you're able to balance doing your homework, but then also asking the artist about some background that maybe you did not get a chance to find.
Hopefully, that's what I try to do.
Who was your most important mentor, and what did you learn from your mentor?
So my British editor is called Penny Black Music, was very patient with me. When I first started writing, there were a lot of assignments. We were doing CD reviews, doing video reviews, doing live reviews, interviews. And so I was very excited, but sometimes I would just send in a first draft, and I realized very quickly, don't do that. Don't do that to your editor. Sleep on it, look at it with fresh eyes, because invariably you might be excited, but you made mistakes. You didn't catch what you should have caught. So he taught me that resilience. He taught me to look deeper and to go deeper on your subject matter. Revision is so important. Research is so important. And so, you know, he stood by me. I also, prior to that, worked at a community newspaper, and I didn't know how to do things like write news stories. And so that editor was really helpful, and with his red marks all over the place. I'm like, you don't write a news story like that, you know. So you need people that are constructively critical. And I've had a few people like that that have been extremely helpful and patient.
Mhm. What was your load for Penny Black music? How much did you have to write in a day? What was
You know,
the timeline like?
I pushed myself. I was at, you know, a certain point doing 4 interviews a month, which is quite a bit because I do everything myself. I record and prepare the questions and transcribe and the whole bit, and then revise and sometimes arrange the interviews myself. So it's very time consuming. I generally in interviews could run about 3,500 words or so. So it's a time consuming commitment. And yeah, so I pushed myself a lot. And at first when I did it, I had these little tricks like, okay, I'm going to do 25 interviews. And then it was, I'm going to do A to Z. And so I got Dweezil Zappa, I got Question Mark and the Mysterians for Q, and I got Jimmy Webb for W, and I got, so I went through the alphabet to keep myself interested. And finally I got my A to Z's. And so, and then it was just like, okay, what about the guitarists? You know, what do I want to learn about guitarists? What do I want to learn about melodic bass players? What do I learn? What do I want to learn about songwriters? There are always burning questions that I had that I wanted to bring to my audience. So I started from that space of being very curious.
Mhm. How did you get your break? How did you get that position?
Well, you know, I saw this poster for an artist named Robin Hitchcock, and the review says something like, this is a very quirky British artist, and I was really intrigued. So I went to see the artist, and I said, I had this bee in my bonnet. I said, I want to interview him. So I got in touch with the publicist, but at that time I was pretty green. I didn't know how to handle this kind of thing. And I got in touch with the reader, and the reader said, well, I would publish Robin Hitchcock if you get me the interview. So I had kind of two people saying, I'll do it if you do that, and I'll do it if you do that. But I didn't get a commitment. Well, finally, the publicist had been a reporter, and she kind of felt compassion for me. I think she knew I was new, but so she gave the interview to her boss. Then it turned out her boss his wife was going to have a baby. So he dropped out of the whole thing. And then I'm like, okay, I have no interview. What now? Anyway, she did come back in the picture. She nailed the interview for me. So I got a few clips in the Reader. And once I started getting clips in the Reader and a few other local outlets, I was able to present my clips to other people. And that's so important. You've got to get those original pieces to show that you can put together interviews and meet deadlines.
So when you try to book that artist well, he dropped out, and then did you have a plan B at that time?
Well, I guess the plan B would have been not to interview that artist. And so, and then fortunately, I formed a relationship with that public relations person who gave me a few more leads. So I got some other interviews.
Mhm.
There are times interviews just don't work out, and you just move on.
At that time, did you have to pay for interviews? For the press, do the press have to pay for interviews, or?
No, I mean, not that I'm aware of. It's usually to help, you know, push the artist's agenda, and so you're helping them. You're on a team really of helping to promote what they're doing. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it hasn't been my experience.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you've never had an artist like a publicist ask for payment in order to get an interview?
I have not. I have heard of it. I have heard of people asking that, but it's just not been anything that's happened to me.
Good for you, because I have encountered that. It wasn't an artist. It was more like a speaker, a public speaker, and then I felt his message was important, and then I wanted to interview him, and then I couldn't believe that they would talk about payment.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you mentioned in Through the Eye of the Tiger, A Survivor's Tale, that you met Jim Pedreck in a songwriting workshop in the 80s. What other events did you attend to meet artists?
Okay, so I was a member of what's called the Recording Academy, which is a group that works where the Grammys, they have local chapters all over the US. So they would have various functions that I would go to. Some were just kind of like cocktail party things, and some were songwriting workshops or production workshops. So I went to things like that. And I also went to anything involved with music or writing. Later on, I went to the Breadloaf Conference, which is like for writers of fiction and nonfiction and poetry. And also like there's Story Studio in Chicago. There's Northwestern, most universities have some kind of writing program or maybe writing camp. So I was always putting my feelers out for ways in which I could, grow and work my craft, get to know people, and just hopefully get better at what I was trying to accomplish.
So at those venues, did you get to know fellow reporters, fellow aspiring journalists, or did you get to did you get to contact the actual artists that you would want to interview?
I would say more artists and producers.
Okay.
And yeah, not so many journalists. Yeah. Sometimes people behind the scenes, camera people, things like that. I've worked with a few, photographers over the years that have been very helpful too.
And helping you get an interview.
Well, just helping me make my story better. Yeah, or sometimes, I'll have a photographer friend who'll say, oh, there's this club date, do you want to cover the story? That kind of thing. So you kind of help each other.
How did you get into the Recording Academy?
Well, I had this album, the children's tape, which was it had to be nationally distributed at that time, which meant that it had to be available in across the U.S. So it was available in a few stores in the U.S. So that was my original entree to it.
So it was a children's a tale. So was that a recording? A set of recordings of children's songs that you wrote?
Yes, it was original music. It was called a multicultural singing safari. And I did research on different languages and then wrote some kind of songs based on those languages in the native language and then in English. And the whole idea was to get children acclimated to other language groups and to be curious and to have fun, really. And also just to understand at an early age that words are important, words can be weapons, words can be ways to establish friendships. I just wanted that to be something that teachers could work with in the curriculum.
There must have been selections from that we played. Caribou,
yes,
the bat song, and that one with the cranes. What was the crane song? What was the title of it?
Yeah, One White Crane.
One White Crane. Yes, that was beautiful.
Well, thank you. Yeah, now that was fun. I used the pentatonic scale, which you might call like the black keys on the piano. It's probably the easiest way to describe that. It was really fun to play, and it's repetitive because I want the kids to be able to learn things kind of easily. And the other thing is, when sometimes a child might learn a language or listen to a language, the whole point was not like, oh, you have to be proficient, you have to do it perfectly, just to be curious and to understand how many beautiful languages there are, and that and these can be in your toolbox, to learn and to greet people and this kind of thing.
How many songs did you have in that album, and also what languages did they encompass?
Okay, so I had Spanish, French, Lakota, Swahili, Yiddish. I'm hoping I'm not forgetting Japanese. I think that was it. And had I had more funding, I would have done another one. Because I did it at a bookstore, and a mom came up and said, well, why don't you have this language? I said, I ran out of funding, but I'd love to have that language next time. I'm open to anything.
And you got the funding from the Chicago, I forgot what it was. The
Chicago Office of Fine Arts. They may have a different name now, but they have these individual artist grants. So I was lucky enough to get an artist grant, and I also got a demo grant one year. And then I was asked to be a reader a few years. So I was able to read a lot of grant proposals and see what people were looking for. that kind of thing.
What's a demo grant?
Okay, so artists usually want to have 3 or 4 songs put together to show other people what they can do, either as a songwriter or as a performer or both. It's not meant to be super expensive, but it's meant to give that person an idea of the arrangement, the lyrics, the melody. It can range from simple to more complex, but this way, the producer or whoever listens to it can give it to an artist and say, here's a song. You can dress it up like the little black dress, or here's the basic song. So that's called a demo.
And how much is a demo grant approximately worth?
So this grant was for under $1,500. So my job was to get some quotes from different studios, like 3 or 4 studios, try to figure out where to get the best deal for what I wanted to accomplish. So yeah, it was a little bit under that, and it was very helpful.
And what you did want to accomplish was to get that recording and find somewhere to record that recording.
Yes. Exactly, to find some musicians that would help, to find a studio engineer that was easy to work with, who was cost effective, to have the instrumentation I needed. I didn't need all that much. I needed like a good acoustic piano. I needed an electric piano that I didn't want to bring in myself, either drum machines, drums, things of that nature. So, there were a few studios that foot the bill.
So did you have enough money with the $1,500 $1,500 grant? You did.
I did, yes. Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Was there a first time at events featuring artists that you asked an artist for a follow-up and an interview?
Well, I went to the Fest for Beatles fans. This is something that has been happening every year in Rosemont, Illinois. And so there are a few people that I saw there. For example, Joey Moland, who was with the group Badfinger, Henry McCullough, who was with Wings, I think Alan White, who was with Yes. So there are a few artists that would show up there and talk to the guests. And so I landed some interviews. It wasn't usually what they'll do is give you their information. You'll talk to their team, and then the team will arrange to do either in person or phoner. With Henry McCullough, it was actually an in-person interview at the fest later at night.
What was the name of the fest again?
Oh, it's called the Fest for Beatles Fans.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
How did you first establish your contacts when you didn't have many contacts, such as asking artists to interview with you? Or is it that your dad was already in the business and that helped you?
Yeah, I wouldn't say my dad was, kind of knew what I was trying to accomplish. But, I was always going to clubs, and then, maybe you get to know a club owner, or maybe you get to know a band member. And, like the rising acts, the coming up acts they usually love to get some free press. So there are a number. I don't just do like the legends. I love the legends, but I also love the new ambitious acts. They're usually more than willing to do an interview with you. So they can add that to their collection. So yeah, I would say just a lot of informal networking helped for that purpose.
Was there any rising act that later became more well known that you found and that you interviewed?
There was a group called Water Street. I really haven't checked on them lately. Yeah, I can't think offhand. Quite possibly. Our Chicago bands are pretty resilient and ambitious. I wouldn't be surprised.
How did you apply your Northeastern Illinois University Bachelor's in Education, major concentration in music, and Master's in Applied Linguistics to your career in other ways besides what we discussed?
Well, okay. Well, I mean, I do love to travel. So I think, learning different cultures, different languages, different types of music always made me a traveler. So I just always wanted, like, if I went on a trip, I'd want to know where I can hear local music, where I can pick up a local CD. That was just always fun for me. And yeah, so I think, each thing springboards off the last thing, and it kind of certain point just comes together, travel, education, writing, whatever kind of writing. I'm kind of into many types of writing, essays, really anything with words is kind of intriguing to me.
When did that being intrigued with words start with you?
My parents are very musical. My dad was an English lit teacher, and when I was a teenager, I found that really annoying because he would push me. He'd say I wasn't articulate enough, and he'd say, "How was school?" I'd go, and he'd say, "Tell me how was school, or I'm going to make you write a composition." So I didn't appreciate it when I was growing up, but I think school helps a lot, and I think, just reading certain I think what happened, like I read Catcher in the Rye and I said, oh, like that's a real person talking to me. And it demystified writing for me, because there was a time when I thought writing was just this thing I couldn't access, some highfalutin thing out there. But then I started reading some novels that where I really related to the characters. And I said, well, I could be that teenager, or I am that teenager. And then it felt like something I could accomplish.
Mm-hmm. Was there another book besides Catcher in the Rye that helped steer you on this path?
Ooh, well, I read a lot of memoirs, which was interesting. I read a memoir, I think it was Artur Rubinstein, a classical pianist, and he said how people would pay all this money to see his concerts, but his neighbor would always be banging on the wall saying, "Shut up." So it's like it. And then I remember reading about Chopin. I love Chopin, and he lived in the village of, he lived in the island of Majorca, and the villagers didn't like the guy and they wouldn't help him move his piano. And so you kind of learned like what it was like to be one of these people, and the trial and error, and the setbacks. And people love that person when they're on stage. They're not always the friend when they're off stage. You kind of learn the arc of one's life, and that's just useful. That's useful information in terms of like getting back on the horse.
Was Chopin in his original environment, or was he an outsider in where he was living?
Yeah, he was an outsider. He had tuberculosis, so he was told to go to a warm climate. Yeah, I think he was from Poland originally, and I think he lived in France. So yeah, he was an outsider for sure. And many musicians are outsiders. I think that's what makes them interesting.
Really?
Yeah.
So actually, did you work a lot in what penny black music? Are you in the UK, or are you working from the US? Because you originate from Chicago, and then
yes.
And then you're a major presence at the penny black music.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here. So it's an online publication.
I see. Mm-hmm. But when you interview the British artists, then you're able to do it like online or on Zoom or something like that. You don't have to meet with them.
Yes. Yeah. I have done a few in-person interviews. When the Zombies came, I interviewed Colin Blunstone in person. And yeah, there's a few face-to-face interviews I've done as well. Yeah.
So I guess you were able to do more face-to-face interviews before the pandemic?
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
How long did it take you to write Through the Eye of the Tiger, A Survivor's Tale by Jim Pedreck?
So that was, his memoir, and, he was a very busy guy, probably still is. So we had to coordinate our schedules. I did about 50 conversations with him initially, trying to figure out the best themes. And then he also wanted to literally write. So then at that point, I was looking more at the writing and looking at it from that editing perspective. So yeah, it takes time. And also, sometimes, I think it could be a big thing for someone to do a memoir project. It involves a lot of trust, a lot of time, and it's not always easy stuff. So they have to kind of be in the right mood to talk about personal things, and that doesn't happen all the time.
This is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM. And we have with us via Zoom, Lisa Torem, rock journalist and fiction writer. Which episode would you say in Jim Pedreck's career was most difficult for him to explain to you?
Well, so he was in the band Survivor, which he formed, and then he was having issues with his guitarist, Frankie Sullivan. I mean, I'm only speaking from his perspective. Everyone has their own perspective, but there were some issues there with people feeling they weren't utilized properly in the band, let's say that. So that was a very difficult time, you know, because ultimately he quit the band, and that was a very big decision. They were successful, and then to quit the band and to move on. He did move on very successfully, but at that point, you know, that was a critical decision.
And then what happened to the band after he left?
Well, you know, there's a few stories out there. I think that there were members going off into solo careers, doing, you know, studio work and so forth. Yeah, and a lot of different scenarios evolved from that.
Mm-hmm. In what ways did the depression that Jim Pedreck described parallel the depression of other artists about whom you wrote?
Well, I just wanted to say I'm also working on a book on the work of Billy Joel, and I spoke to his drummer Liberty DeVito, who worked with him for 30 years. A song that Billy Joel wrote was called "I Go to Extremes," and Liberty DeVito said to me, he says, you know, that song really shows the life of a musician, because he explained to me, you go on tour, there's thousands of people, you're on top of the world, and then you have to come down from that high and you go back to your normal life, and it's nowhere, you know, you're doing laundry and washing the dishes, taking out the dog, whatever it is. It's so different, and you go back to that life, and then you go back on the road. And it really is this life of extremes. And so it's going to lead to some kind of, you know, weird physiological response in most cases to have such extremes. And that can lead to depression. Some of the artists I've spoken to, a woman named Darlene Love, she did a song called He's a Rebel. And then she was sort of off the radar. She was a cleaning woman in I think, LA. And the woman she worked for said, aren't you Darlene Love? And so then her career got resurrected. I mean, there's so many people who had to start from scratch again. And with luck, sometimes they got back, you know, on with their career, sometimes not. The ones I hear about are the ones who did, of course.
So the depression causes them to, their career to get sidetracked. And then the ones that you are mentioning are the ones that are like Jim Pedreck, that somehow managed to overcome that depression.
Right. Mm-hmm.
How did you come to write Tori Amos on Track?
So I pitched it to the editor. I had already.
Close the outdoor door, outside door, but leave this door open. Okay.
I was already a big fan of Tori, and I explained in the book how I kind of met her. And I was really psyched about introducing her work to people who didn't know about as much of her work that I thought was necessary. I mean, she came to the business with this incredible classical piano background, just really fresh ideas lyrically and thematically. And she started when she was very young. She started her career at, she started training at 5. She was accepted into the Peabody Conservatory in Maryland as a prodigy. So she had this brilliant training. So I was really excited about doing that research, and hopefully my enthusiasm came through. And yeah, it's been really a lot of fun to, comb through the work. And I've also had the opportunity to talk to some arrangers and producers and journalists that have talked with her and worked with her, and to offer those insights as well.
So you spoke with her publicist in the beginning. How did you establish that contact?
No, I did not speak with her publicist. I spoke with an editor who commissioned me to do the book.
I see.
Yeah.
So the editor of the publisher that actually is going to be publishing the book right now is yes.
Yes, and that actually should be out fairly soon in the US, in the UK, and then the US. So I'm guessing kind of November.
And then
and that's called On Track Tori Amos.
On Track Tori Amos. Okay, so I guess the editor saw your work in Penny Black music and thought that you would be a great fit for writing the book as well.
You know, I really don't know. I mean, generally editors, sometimes they don't tell you how they know that you would do something. So I'm guessing that he looked up my prior work, but I don't really know.
And did you have to submit a resume to him at all, or no?
No, I did not. But in other situations, when I've pitched a few things to publishers, yes, you know, they all want something different. Some people want a lot of information. They want complete resumes. They want, you know, clips and this kind of thing. So yeah, you know, I'm guessing maybe he knew of me through this network of people.
Yes. Of over the 500 interviews, stories, and reviews that you did on Penny Black music, which articles impressed and inspired you the most?
Well, that's a tough question, but a great question. What comes to mind is Andy Gill, and I believe I heard Anthrax on one of your programs. Great song. So Andy Gill was an incredible guitarist for Gang of Four, and he put this whole interesting twist on distortion in the British post-punk genre. And just, you know, he knew so much about being a producer. He knew so much about trying to choose band members that would be complementary to his vision. He was also quite a feminist, and that was really cool and really a nice surprise to know that he was really backing, you know, women trying to get into the production industry and into where they were pretty much underrepresented and so forth. So, you know, when you're lucky, you get that element of surprise in your interviews. You find out something brand new, and it was a really enjoyable interview. I had met him prior to that after a gig in the green room, and he offered me an interview then, and I thought, wow, this is my only choice. But I said no because I was truly not prepared. So I was happy that I had said no then, so that I could be prepared for the ultimate interview.
Yes. And was there something that he did, especially for the feminist movement, that really helped?
I think it was like building awareness of technical issues. I know when I started talking to people in the industry, I mean, there were so few like studio engineers that were women. I'm guessing there's a lot more now, but it was just like a real rarity. So I think that part of his mission was to bring more focus onto, you know, getting women into these technical industries and giving them access and the training and the acceptance and so forth, and encouragement. Encouragement's a big deal.
So are there more female engineers still in the industry now? And I guess he wanted to help because they are well-paying jobs.
Absolutely, yeah. And, you know, certainly more stable than sort of the up and coming singer-songwriting mode where, you know, you don't know where your next paycheck is coming from. So yeah, I mean, in many ways, it's the behind the scenes things can be lucrative and stable.
And he was successful in helping more women get into the industry?
I believe so. I don't have any actual evidence of that, but I do think it was important to him, and he was in a great position to move that forward.
Well, actually, he could help some women to work with his productions, right?
You know, I don't really know, but I do think, yeah, I think he built an awareness, which I think was so important.
Of course. Was there any interview that you regret, and why?
Okay, I won't mention any names, but I did have an interview with an artist who I could tell from the minute we were on the phone, she did not want to talk to me. Nothing personal. I don't think she wanted to talk to the press. I don't know if she's having a bad day. She did have sort of a, you know, reputation as being a bit ornery. and you do sometimes get those artists that they don't really want to do the press, and but the publicist, you have to do it. Some people love it, some are great at it, and in this case, I did do the story, but the story was not generated by a lot of like love. Let me put it that way.
Mhm. Okay. So what would you have done differently? Could you have like right now, with all your experience, could you tell that an interview might not be too good? And were there any warning signs of that, of how she might have how that interview did eventually turn out?
Well, I think you also have to look at the person you're interviewing, and not, now in this case, it was somebody who just was, I think, sort of hostile. But there have been interviews with people who are incredibly talented, but they may not be the best chatters. And that's okay too. You have to admire what they do. I interviewed Johnny Winter, and who is an incredibly talented person who overcomes so many obstacles. He wasn't that chatty, So and his manager, his second manager, Paul Nelson, was kind of going, "Come on, Johnny, you got to say something to her. You got to say something to her." He wasn't terribly verbose, but it's okay, because I had this insight. It's like, that's totally fine. So when I wrote that story, I wasn't concentrating so much on pull quotes. It's more like, here's this incredible artist. Look at the great work he's done. And so you kind of switch gears at that point.
Mm-hmm. So how long was the interview? Do you still remember?
It was a shorter interview than normal.
Okay. How much of your own creative work did you submit to contests and anthologies for you to win for such work as Pedreck, dog sharing, and Singlish?
I was really lucky with Pedreck. I was kind of, sending out a few poems. Now, I'm not much of a poet, but I had this thing in my head, like I want something published. So I wrote this kind of crazy thing, and I sent it out, and it was a group that does these LED displays, basically. And they liked the poem. And so they not only published it in their anthology, but they did this display as sort of these lights. I'm not too good at describing technical things, but they did it at Laurie's Planet of Sound, the record store on Lincoln. And they had sort of this display with these red LED lights going around and around and around, and the text kind of in these, I think it was like blue lights just kind of coming out at you. And they had that display on for about a week. So it's three-dimensional and a lot of fun. Dog sharing, I lucked out because I'd written this one-act play in a writing group. And one of the women in the group said, "You should send it out." I'm like, I'm not going to send it out. Who's going to read the one-act play? She said, "No, let's go to Kinko's. Let's Xerox it. Let's send it out." I'm like, okay. So I sent it out, and I heard from them, I guess a few weeks later. It was off Broadway theater in New York, and they included it in their one-act play festival, and I went to see it, and they did great casting. I mean, it's just incredible casting. Okay. So I was very fortunate.
So you at that time you just Xeroxed it, and then you sent it to various playhouses?
Well, this was a particular contest, so I sent it to the contest people. It was their theater sponsoring a contest.
I see. And then after you won, then they also sent it out because you won, but you were hesitant in sending it out to actual playhouses, right?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have much faith in myself. It was the first time I'd try something like that, so it was kind of a surprise to me. And it was also, mine was one of, I think, 3 one-acts that evening. So yeah, I mean, but I guess I was sort of lucky because, and I wouldn't have done the contest had my friend not, yanked my arm and said, "Okay, we're going to Xerox this and send it out."
Mm-hmm. So you wrote that when before your friend found it, and then submitted it to the contest.
Yeah. Well, we had this writing group, and we'd sit around and analyze each other's work, and they thought it was a fun piece. So then that, and she was a bit more ambitious and confident than I was in the work. So.
Mm-hmm. And at that time, you were already an established rock journalist, but you wanted to expand out into creative writing?
I I'm not sure I have the sequence right. I don't think I was doing as much of the music writing. I was just kind of experimenting with different forms like screenwriting and playwriting and that kind of thing.
Mhm. What about during the Pedreck days? Were you a rock journalist at that time, or were you still
Yes.
you were?
Yes. That was a
Yeah.
bit of a diversion. And I also got a
Mhm.
short story published around that time. So then I'm like, okay, let me try for an anthology project, because the nice thing about anthologies is, they'll pull from here and from here and from here. It's not as much of a commitment as, writing a book, a complete book. You can do one piece and possibly get published.
Mhm. And why did you want to write a poem? Were you reading a lot of lyrics of artists and that inspired you? What happened?
Yeah, I was getting into sort of some of the beat poets and things like that. So yeah, and it's funny, I was in sort of this mood of like, oh man, if I send it out, I'll be rejected again. I was getting kind of annoyed of the whole idea of being rejected really rattled me, but it rattled me to the point of like, I'm gonna write something. And so sometimes that happens, you're frustrated, and I think that came out of a sense of frustration, which I guess came through. It's kind of a poem about being frustrated.
Can you share how many rejection slips you got, and was it for Pedreck or was it for other works?
Oh, I think everybody has a stack of things. I had sent other poems out and got rejected, and yeah, all sorts of things. Screenwriting contests and yeah, you name it,
So at that time you were well, Pedreck was after you were doing you were already established as a rock journalist, but
Mhm.
before being a rock journalist, you were just writing and just hoping to get published.
Yeah, I really wanted, well, I also was writing things for parenting magazines. Now, what happened was I wrote this piece called Fetal Attraction. It was before I had my first daughter, and I'm like wondering what she's going to look like, what she's going to sound like. So I wrote this article and I sent it to a Chicago parent, and they published it. And they had this illustrator do this fantastic illustration. But what happened was the editor contacted me and said, oh, I liked your short anecdotal humor piece. And then I said, oh, I guess that's what I'm doing, because I didn't know what I was writing, but that's what I was doing. Sometimes people tell you what you're doing.
But when you submit to these magazines, you have to kind of see what section what section it is, and what in that section they're publishing. So when you submit it, did you have some idea that that section would be amenable to your submission?
I did. I knew that they published essays, and I'm very fond of writing essays. So yeah, they wanted first person accounts, and there were the parameters, having to do with being a future parent, being a parent, something of that nature. So yeah, I did look carefully in the magazine to see if it's something that would be applicable.
Mhm. What advice do you have for students about your career as a rock journalist and being a creative writer?
Well, don't get hung up on things like, oh my God, I have writer's block. Writer's block to me means that you're not generating brand new ideas, and you're not always going to be generating brand new ideas. You're probably, whatever ideas you have are probably going to be based on something else, first of all. So don't be too hard on yourself. Work on your other skills, because it's not just about that creative spark. It's about hard work. It's about revising. It's about adding. It's about maybe adding, information from other sources and doing research. There's so many parts to being a writer. So don't get hung up on one aspect. And also think about your audience and artist viewpoint. Like what does the audience want to know? If you don't know, then look around, go to shows. What do people want to see that maybe couldn't go to a concert? What can you give to them? And basically what are you sharing? What are you contributing? Because it's a relationship with your audience, with your subject. What is your artist viewpoint? Do you have it right? Do you need to clarify it? And keep in mind, like I said, that it's a relationship. It's not just you want to write. It's, what are you giving as well as what you're receiving.
You mentioned that you have other skills that wannabe writers would need to also access their other skills and apply them. So what other skills did you apply?
Well, because of my love for music, it's funny, I bought a bass guitar. I really haven't played it, but I had this fantasy of learning bass guitar, and then I was too lazy. But, when you're interested in an aspect of something that you're going to interview someone about, it's very helpful. You try to play the bass line that I interviewed Jack Bruce, for example, who he did Sunshine of Our Love and Cream and wonderful bass lines and stuff. Well, so then when you pick up a bass and you're not a bass player and you're stumbling it, your fingers are fumbling all over the place, you even appreciate it more because it's tough. It's tough to come up with new stuff. So, always learning in my instruments, trying to be better at the instruments I play has helped me be more empathetic. Or, singers, I mean, they have all sorts of issues. Am I going to be able to get through the night? They have all sorts of issues. And so, if you do these things yourself, I think you gain an appreciation for the obstacles that some of the performers have to go through.
If you were to have a break to be a musician instead of a writer, might your career have taken another track?
Yeah, I suppose so. I think I'm really in both worlds. And I think the writing just kept tapping me on the shoulder and saying, all right, here's your next assignment. But I have not, I'm still in that world. I'm still in that world and probably will always be. And maybe if I find a little club, it'll say, hey, I will show up.
Let's talk a little bit about the All That Glitters project and your work with Ava Sherry. Could you elaborate a little bit about that?
Sure. So Ava's another Chicago person. Grew up, I think, around the Brownsville area. She ended up being a backup singer and muse and inspiration for David Bowie in the 70s and Luther Vandross in the 80s, wearing these fancy designer clothes and Versace gowns. And she was a big influencer to her audiences and to the Bowie and the Vandross audiences. Never gave up. I mean, just very resilient person. And also she's had a dance career that's been very successful, recording vocals and for dance music and writing dance music. And she's done international festivals. So it's been really interesting to work with her on, how she success and how she's just kept going. She had a wonderful family too, a very supportive family. But, she's got many stories of, working with celebrities and just really, how you keep going in a tough industry with all its changes.
So is that tough industry what inspired her to start the All That Glitters project that helps underrepresented artists like in Brownsville?
Well, I think that, she wanted young artists, I think in particular, to understand what it takes. I met her at the David Bowie Is exhibit at the Museum of Contemporary Art, which was a wonderful exhibit. And so she had sat next to me and she had just mentioned, we talked briefly and she says, well, I'm thinking about doing this. And we kept in touch. Those things don't always crystallize immediately, but, we kept in touch over a series of months. And then we met a few times. And then at a certain point, I think she was ready and I was ready to commit to a full-time project. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be at allthatglittersmedia.com if anyone wants to check it out. It should be out actually early next year.
Mm-hmm. Well, could you explain what that project is? Because a lot of people don't know.
Okay, so it's really Ava talking about her life, growing up in Chicago on the South Side, getting record deals, in some cases being a woman of color, being, not treated fairly in the industry. And then all the celebrities she met and had encounters with, and I think a lot of them she influenced and they influenced her. She knew the Stones and she knew members of the Beatles and she knew just all sorts of groups. And she was at some of these famous clubs, Studio 54. And so, it's also sort of a look at Chicago, the history of Chicago. There was the Regal Theater that was a wonderful theater on the South Side, no longer there, but where she saw a lot of acts like Michael Jackson when she was growing up. So it's also a glimpse into Chicago history that maybe a lot of us are not aware of.
Mhm. So is that the project trying to bring the history and then bring more opportunities to musicians in underrepresented areas like Brownsville?
Yes, I hope so. I think that the intent was to do that in part. And yeah, that's been very important.
Mhm. Do you know offhand what the mission is of the All That Glitters project?
Yeah, so I think it's really, for Ava to tell her truth the way she sees it, and for, hopefully for young artists to be inspired and maybe, learn from her vision of she's a very optimistic person, and she gets up every morning. She's in great physical shape. She's very health conscious. She's been on the road. She had so many colleagues who, were drug addicts and all sorts of other issues, and she's never done any of that. She's healthy and strong and optimistic, and she's always working on her craft. And so I think that's a big part of the story,
Mhm.
is to kind of say to people, yeah, you can do this and don't give up.
So how else are they supporting the artists in Brownsville with this project? Is it more of an awareness campaign, or is there, if let's say there are aspiring artists, in what way could they connect with this All That Glitters project so that it might be able to help them?
Well, I mean, I must say that they're doing outreach at this point. I'm thinking that, when the book comes out, and hopefully there'll be some live appearances. Nobody really knows, but I think there's not a real plan set in place in terms of that connection, but but certainly people can find out more about the project, and hopefully it will kind of develop a life of itself in terms of having, people be inspired by this project.
And if the listeners want to get more information, how could they access that information about the All That Glitters project? Just Google, or do you have some contact information?
So allthatglittersmedia.com should get you there. And my other books would be on Sonic Bond Publishing, SONICBOND, Sonic Bond Publishing. So yeah, I mean, that will give somebody a start. I'm on Facebook, like, hi everybody. So yeah, and maybe you guys will invite me back, which would be fabulous.
Of course. For radio, you also are in Huntley Community Radio.
Mhm.
So was that an interview, or do you have any? So you were on an interview with
Yes.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And that was very recent too.
That was very recent. The person, Jim Eggers, is the engineer who was in charge, and Mark and Jim Samaria. These two guys wrote a book about classic rock, and Jim Samaria is a photographer that I've worked with. And so they have this great station where they do a lot of classic rock, and that was my first radio interview. So I'm new at this. You probably figured that out.
No, you're very good. We thought that you do interviews all the time. So so was it your publicist for the book asking you to do interviews to promote the book? How did you come to interview with Jim Eggers with the Huntley Community Radio?
Well, yeah. So my friend Jim Samaria invited me as a guest.
Ah.
So that's how that happened. And they're just fun guys. They're just really fun. So it's a great day.
So is it that you enjoyed that interview so much that you reached out to us at WZRD to interview with us?
I did, and I was lucky enough to get an affirmative response. And also I was delighted because, being an alum, it was, my local station, and I was very excited that you would have that interest in speaking with me. And I thank you for that.
Thank you. So you have also had other columns, Rock Salt Row that has been archived, and where was that?
Okay, well, Rock Salt Row was a column I designed where two writers would argue. They would spar about something. In British English, they call that a row. So they would argue about some point of music. That's no longer up there. Now I have Raging Pages, And Raging Pages is my rock lit column, and I review books there every issue, which is like, I guess every 6 weeks or something. So I've been really fortunate, and it's been really fun to see, there's been a lot of memoirs that I've reviewed, books, how-to books, technical aspects of the music business. So it's and I try to vary it, I'll try to get into a genre maybe I don't know too much about, and I might be doing a book on Latin music and so forth in the future. So I'm just a lot. It's been a lot of fun.
So the issue comes out every 6 months, and then you have how many articles per issue?
6 weeks. I'm sorry.
I mean, six weeks. Yes. Well, even that, every 6 weeks is every 6 weeks. How many articles do you have in that issue?
Usually I have my Raging Pages and then an interview or so. So yeah, pretty much some reviews, some CD reviews, maybe a live review. Yeah. Not too many live reviews lately,
Yes, because you did mention that you have over 500 articles and interviews in the Penny Black, in Raging Pages, which is in Penny Black Music, right?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't have a count anymore. I know my editor would probably be able to come up with the numbers.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, for the American blues scene, so you also published about that as well. Where did you publish about the American blues scene?
Yeah, so I did a few live concert reviews with my colleague Phil Manjaro. So we would sometimes go out of the city. I think we covered the Who in Cleveland. Yeah, so we would just kind of go on various trips, and yeah, I'm not recollecting exactly which acts right off the bat, but yeah, we would do stories. He would do photography, and I would do a review of a band, essentially.
Mm-hmm. So you've also written for the Chicago Reader as well. Do you still remember what you wrote for? How many articles you wrote for Chicago Reader?
So I did Robin Hitchcock and Mercury Rev, and those were. Yeah, I don't think I wrote for them too much after that. But yeah, it was extremely important. And they've always been great with the music scene. I mean, like back in the day, everybody read the Reader. I mean, everybody before all the internet, that's where you went. If you came to Chicago, you read the Reader to know what was happening.
Yes. What about Inside Publications? Is that the publication that encompasses Uptown, Rogers Park, and some other community, Edgewater?
Yeah, they have different papers that cover different areas. And, I would recommend anyone who's starting in writing, it's a great opportunity to do community news, and you can kind of, I did all sorts of things. I tried to get a few feature stories in there, which is what led me, because what happened, the reason I started, I heard that Pete Best's band was going to be at Heartland Cafe, and for anyone who doesn't know, Pete Best was the drummer before Ringo Starr and the Beatles. So that was a big news item, and I wrote a little review about the Pete Best band, and I didn't know who to send it to because I was just starting out, and I was just calling aimlessly. Like I think I told you previously, I wasn't sure how to go about getting published. And so even though I wasn't getting feedback from anybody else, I called the community newspaper, and the editor said, you know what, I can't publish this. Someone actually gave me a story, but do you want to be a beat reporter? I've got a story. I want you to interview the t-shirt vendors at Wrigley Field. So I ended up doing my first story about this whole family of t-shirt vendors, and 3 generations of t-shirt vendors. And I didn't know it was going to be published, and I walked into the library a few weeks later, and it was on one of the first pages. So I was really excited about that. But that's what gave me the clips and gave me the experience prior to any of the music writing.
Oh, okay. So did you submit around for creative writing or for this nonfiction writing in the beginning, or both at the same time?
Yeah, I guess I've always been doing that kind of thing, here and there, sometimes more than others. And then, over the past few years, I've been doing novellas, which are short novels, and looking at some point to really work on those and crack the code and possibly get those published. I don't know when. I have no date for that. That will probably take some more hard work and some luck.
You also want some fellowships. Could you give some advice to our listeners about how to apply for and get fellowships?
Well, be really clear about what you're trying to accomplish and follow the rules, because really they're going to screen you. And if you can't follow the rules, they'll probably say, well, we're not going to work with you because we don't want our editor to have to be troubled with this. So whatever they want, give them what they want specifically. They want a proposal, they want a synopsis, they want a 1 page, don't give them 5 pages. Be very clear in your writing, hopefully get other people to proof it, hopefully get other people to give you feedback. And think of it from, who their audience is. If it's an anthology, who are the people reading the anthology? Do a little homework and try to figure out what they're trying to accomplish. Look at other writers who've been published, that kind of thing.
And where would aspiring writers find these fellowships?
I just kind of came up with these. I knew about Breadloaf. There was a group that's no longer happening where I found out about the other thing. I think you can really just Google this kind of thing and come up with it, and maybe join some writers groups, and those people know all sorts of stuff. The writers conferences, Northwestern is a great writers conference. They probably know all about this kind of thing.
Okay. So go to conferences, get information there, and then also Google fellowships and writing, something like that.
Yeah. There's a lot of contests out there, and perhaps maybe learn to write a proposal and get in that way. And again, really clear writing is very important.
Mm-hmm. So before we go into the last part of the community assessments, how many languages did you say that you are fluent in?
Oh, I won't say I'm fluent. I speak enough Spanish to get by. A few times I've been on an airplane and the flight attendant will say, somebody said, well, this young woman's very scared. It's her first flight. I knew enough Spanish to help this young woman. I knew enough Spanish to help somebody get some medicine at Walgreens. I love listening to language and hopefully getting by. When I've visited Latin American countries, I can usually get by, but I can't speak, I can't talk about politics or anything too intense, but I can get by. I can order food and converse on a light level. It's always fun though.
Let's do a WZRD community assessment with you. Mm-hmm. WZRD Chicago, being a nonprofit radio station, must be responsible to the community we serve. WZRD is mandated to file quarterly issues with the FCC on non-entertainment, community-focused programming. We like to assess the community for these quarterly issue topics with 3 questions. First, what is most important to you?
I think hearing new music from local artists and having those artists have an opportunity is just huge. It's just huge. Artists that are on the rise, that have something new to say. The legends are also wonderful. Hearing interviews with people that will talk about how they've came. Both are very important.
So you want to give chances to new aspiring artists. Are there many writers out there that are willing to give that first break, give some coverage to aspiring local artists?
I'm sorry, are you asking other?
Yeah, are there many other journalists that are willing to help local aspiring artists to get their name out there, to make them, to help promote them?
I just think it varies. I think that artists just need to, keep their eyes out a lot. I think that people that do CD reviews, they're usually willing to hear a new artist. I think with radio, I think WZRD is one of the rare stations that is able to do this and is willing to do this.
Okay. Now for the second question of the community assessment.
Mhm.
What long-term problem must we address? It doesn't have to be, the music industry. It's just what's most important to you. What is the long-term problem that you feel we must address?
Having an inclusive audience, like groups that are underrepresented. I think that's always important. Maybe genres that are underrepresented. I mean, every genre deserves its day in the sun and so forth. And I think we need to be open. I think what I love about your station is it is a very open-minded station. You can hear music, and that's rare, and that's great. And that gives a lot of people opportunities. So yeah, more of that.
Have you ever interviewed any rap artists?
I've interviewed a rap, yes, and I did a column on Common and his memoir, and then I interviewed a director who did a rap. That was really interesting, a documentary. So yeah, that was really interesting to me.
Third, what problem must we address now?
Always more access, always more. We are here. You can get in touch with us. Accessibility. Yeah, so I mean, I think I knew of you because of Northeastern. I'm not sure that people in other locales would know. Maybe they do, maybe I'm remiss, but just more visibility. It's so wonderful to have this opportunity, and just more visibility, basically.
More visibility for whom again?
Yeah, just for, I think, artists, journalists, people behind the scenes too. I mean, sometimes they're really grateful to be talked with because they're not the stars, but the show doesn't go on without them. Club owners and camera people and studio engineers and all those folks that make everything run so smoothly, but they're not always center stage.
Okay, well, Lisa Torem, rock journalist, creative writer, musician. Thank you so much for joining us on WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Have a great day, and we will be playing a little bit more of your music. And right now, we will play A Night in Tunisia for you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.